I recently done a bit over in Belfast, and I went to talk over there, and it was to the Chelsea Supporters Club. On a Tuesday night it's the Chelsea Supporters Club, and on a Wednesday night it's the Rangers Supporters Club, and it's exactly the same people.
Knew Paul McGrath was different, but nobody wanted to listen.
It was May 14th, 2019, and Pat Nevin was on Newstalk's The Football Show. The football world was busy talking about Manchester City's dramatic Premier League win over Liverpool. Pundits everywhere praised the modern hybrid player, the kind of defender who could stroll into midfield like it was nothing new. But Pat Nevin said football already had a player exactly like that, decades earlier. His name was Paul McGrath.
I'm Oliver, and this is Sport Icons.
And if you can already see why this story deserves more love, use the hype feature and give hype to the video. Because McGrath's story is exactly the kind football history keeps burying. Nobody listened to Pat Nevin that day. Football had already decided who Paul McGrath was. They saw a defender who drank too much. They saw a man with ruined knees. They called him a flawed genius and left it there. They did not see the football brain hiding behind the pain. Pat Nevin saw it. He saw a player who was not just brave, not just strong, not just tough enough to play through injury. This is the story of why Pat Nevin was right and why football took 30 years to catch up. Pat Nevin was not just throwing out a lucky guess. He had spent his whole career noticing players that other people missed. Long before he ever spoke about McGrath, Nevin was praising Celtic fullback Danny McGrain. McGrain was a defender who could read danger early and start attacks from deep. Most pundits at the time only cared about tackles and long balls. Nevin cared about something else. He cared about how a player used space. That is what made Nevin different. He did not just watch football, he studied it. Part of that came from his own story. Pat Nevin was born in Scotland, but his family had strong Irish roots. His own father wanted him to play for the Republic of Ireland instead of Scotland. Nevin grew up seeing both sides of a footballing identity that many fans never think about. That gave him a wider view. He once shared a stage with Paul McGrath and John Giles at Dublin City University. They spoke about football, identity, and what it meant to play for a country that was not always simple to choose. Nevin was not just a football man. He understood people. He understood culture. That helped him understand players like McGrath on a deeper level than most pundits ever could. That same understanding gave Nevin a lot of sympathy for other players caught between two countries. Players like James McCarthy and Aidan McGeady faced heavy criticism from some old voices in the game, including Gordon McQueen, simply for choosing to play for Ireland instead of the country they were born in. Most pundits saw that choice as strange. Nevin saw it as normal. He had lived a version of it himself through his own family. This gave Nevin something rare. He could look at Scottish football and Irish football fairly, without picking a simple side. That same fairness is what let him look past the easy story around Paul McGrath and see the footballer underneath. While other people saw a troubled defender, Nevin saw a footballer shaped by pressure, by identity, and by intelligence. Nevin's opinion was not built from a distance. He had seen McGrath up close, on the pitch, more than once. The first time was on April 9th, 1986. Manchester United played Chelsea in Division 1. McGrath lined up as Manchester United's central defender. Nevin played on the right wing for Chelsea. Nevin tried to run at him. McGrath read every move early. He did not panic. He did not dive into rash tackles. He simply closed the space down before Nevin could use it. A year later, in August 1987, both men played in a huge exhibition match. The Football League faced the rest of the world at Wembley. Some of the greatest names in football history were on that pitch. Maradona was there. Robson was there. Brady was there too. McGrath stood among them as a central defender, calm and composed, never looking out of place, next to some of the biggest stars the game has ever seen. Then came May 5th, 1990. Aston Villa played Everton in a wild game that finished 3-3. McGrath was Aston Villa's central defender. Nevin played right wing for Everton. Again, McGrath showed the same qualities. He read the transitions. He covered space quickly. He stayed calm even when the game turned chaotic. Their paths crossed again on February 27, 1994. Aston Villa faced Tranmere Rovers in a League Cup semi-final. McGrath was still marshalling the back line. Nevin was still trying to find space in behind him. Once again, McGrath's positioning made it hard for Nevin's side to break through. These were not small, friendly kickabouts. These were real matches with real pressure against real quality. Time after time, Nevin watched McGrath do the same thing. He read danger before it arrived. He stayed calm under pressure. He controlled the ball like a man with all the time in the world. Both men were even part of a special occasion together in 1987, when the Football League put out a centenary side at Wembley. Standing among some of the most famous footballers on the planet, McGrath still looked completely at home. He was never a defender who simply survived big occasions. He looked built for them. That is why Nevin's claim about McGrath was never just nostalgia. It was built on years of first-hand evidence, gathered from real football against real quality on real occasions that mattered. Now let us talk about the tactical heart of this story. Today, football loves a player who can do more than one job. A centre-back who can also play in midfield. A fullback who tucks inside to become an extra passer. A defensive midfielder who can drop between the centre-backs when needed. People call these players hybrid players. Pep Guardiola made this style famous with modern football's biggest clubs. But Paul McGrath was doing this decades before anyone had a name for it. Long before the phrase hybrid player ever existed, he was already living it, match after match, season after season. Under Ron Atkinson at Manchester United, and in the early days of Alex Ferguson, McGrath was mainly used as a central defender. When Ferguson took charge of Manchester United on November 8, 1986, his first game ended in a 2-0 defeat away to Oxford United. Even in that difficult moment, McGrath stood out. He headed clear again and again to stop the damage from getting worse. He was already one of the club's most important defensive players during a time of huge change. McGrath was never a defender who just kicked the ball away to be safe. In the 1985 FA Cup semi-final replay at Main Road, he scored an own goal with a header against Liverpool. It was a mistake, yes, but it also showed something important. McGrath was a defender who tried to do more than simply clear his lines. He tried to read the ball, control it, and shape play, even under pressure. That kind of risk only comes from a player who trusts his own footballing brain. It was with the Republic of Ireland under Jack Charlton that McGrath's full talent came out. Charlton's football was direct. He wanted the ball moved quickly into the space behind the other team. When Ireland lost the ball, they had to win it back fast, especially the second ball in midfield. This system needed chaos to work, and chaos needed one man who could control it. That man was Paul McGrath. McGrath became the key player who made Charlton's system function. He could sit deep as a screen in front of the back line. He could drop between the centre-backs to form an extra defender when needed. He could step forward at the perfect moment to break up a counter-attack before it even started. He could then pass the ball out cleanly along the ground, starting attacks himself. Players like Frank Stapleton, Ronnie Whelan and Mark Lawrenson would push forward to attack crosses and second balls. But none of that worked without McGrath holding everything together behind them. He was the calm centre of a storm that Charlton built on purpose. Think about how strange that job really was.
1 minute, McGrath had to defend like a centre-back, standing firm against strikers.
The next minute, he had to think like a midfielder, finding the right pass to start a new attack. Most defenders in that era only had one job. McGrath somehow had two, and he made both of them look simple. This is exactly what modern football calls a defensive midfield screen today. Back then, nobody had that phrase. Football had the player, it just did not have the words. If you want the clearest proof of McGrath's football brain, look at the 1994 World Cup. At that tournament, McGrath was given one of the hardest jobs in football. He had to deal with Roberto Baggio, one of the best playmakers Italy has ever produced. Baggio could destroy defences with one clever pass or one sudden turn. McGrath did not chase him all over the pitch. He did not throw in wild tackles to stop him. Instead, he used position and timing. He arrived early. He stood in exactly the right place before Baggio even received the ball. He made dangerous passes look unsafe before they were even played. He cut off danger before most fans in the stadium even noticed it building. That performance against Baggio is the clearest evidence of everything Nevin was trying to say. McGrath was not simply strong, He was not simply brave. He was a footballer who could read the game 2 steps ahead of everyone else on the pitch. Think about how hard that job usually is. Baggio was one of the most gifted attackers on the planet. Most defenders who faced him had to work themselves into the ground just to slow him down. McGrath barely looked like he was working at all. He made an impossible job look calm and simple. And that calmness was the whole point.
So why did football get McGrath so wrong for so long?
Part of the answer sits in the culture of English football in the 1980s. When Alex Ferguson arrived at Manchester United, he believed the club needed stronger discipline to finally win the league again. To build that discipline, he moved on players linked to the heavy drinking culture of the time. Paul McGrath and Norman Whiteside were among them. Later, Ferguson's tough approach also affected far bigger names, including Paul Ince, Jaap Stam, David Beckham and Roy Keane. This decision helped create a public story that painted McGrath as a problem player, a troublemaker, someone whose lifestyle did not fit professional football, but people who actually played alongside him saw things differently. Liam O'Brien, who played with McGrath, rejected that simple story completely. He said the drinking culture was everywhere in English football during the 1980s. It was never just a Manchester United issue. He called McGrath and his teammates fantastic professionals and fantastic footballers, men who carried huge pressure every single week and still delivered brilliant performances on match day. O'Brien's point matters because he was there. He was not guessing from a TV studio years later. He saw the standards McGrath held himself to on a Saturday afternoon, no matter what had happened earlier in the week. A troublemaker does not keep performing at that level, against that quality of opponent, for that many years. A serious professional does. Then there is the injury story, which might be the biggest misunderstanding of all. Fans were told that McGrath's knees were so damaged that he often could not train properly during the week. So when he produced brilliant performances on Saturday, people called it a miracle, as if his talent came from nowhere. But calling it a miracle missed the whole point. If McGrath could not rely on constant training and constant repetition like other players, he had to rely on something else instead. He had to rely on his mind. He had to see danger before it arrived. He had to save every unnecessary movement. He had to win through timing rather than pure running. In many ways, his damaged knees are proof of just how intelligent his football really was. His body could not always keep up, but his brain always did. That is not a miracle. That is one of the smartest defensive minds English and Irish football has ever produced. Most players learn their timing through hundreds of repeated training drills, week after week. McGrath often could not have that luxury. So instead of relying on repetition, he relied on reading, on watching and on thinking. He built his game inside his own head long before the ball ever reached him. That is not luck. That is one of the purest forms of football intelligence there is. So why did the media never really listen to Pat Nevin when he tried to explain all of this? For years, football punditry preferred simple language. Words like passion, desire, heart and mistakes. Tactics, shape and space were treated like foreign ideas that belonged in a classroom, not a football studio. Pat Nevin spoke a different language completely. He talked about shape, he talked about space, he talked about transitions and roles rather than raw effort alone. That made him stand out, and not always in a good way. Nevin was already seen as unusual because of his love of indie music, literature and tactical thinking. Some in the game saw him as an accidental footballer, someone who did not fit the traditional dressing room mould. So, while traditional punditry saw McGrath as a warrior, Nevin saw a football thinker. While traditional punditry saw pure instinct, Nevin saw calculated positioning. While traditional punditry saw a miracle, Nevin saw pure intelligence. Now bring the story back to today. Modern football praises exactly the qualities that Paul McGrath already had. Central defenders who can step forward into midfield. Defensive midfielders who can drop back into defence when needed. Players who can defend dangerous transitions before they even happen. Coaches now spend hours on the training pitch teaching young defenders to do exactly what McGrath did by instinct. They teach scanning before the ball arrives. They teach stepping into midfield at the right second. They teach staying calm rather than panicking into a tackle. None of this would have surprised McGrath at all. He had already lived it. decades before it had a name or a coaching manual behind it. Pat Nevin was not simply being nostalgic when he spoke about him in 2019. He was looking at the past through modern eyes and finally putting the right words to what he had witnessed years earlier. He understood that McGrath's greatness was never only about courage or natural timing. It was about scanning space, reading danger, staying calm, and making fast decisions before anyone else on the pitch even noticed the problem forming. So let us finish where this story truly belongs, with full respect for Paul McGrath. Paul McGrath was never just one of the best defenders of his era. He was one of the players who quietly showed football where the game was heading. Fans loved him deeply, and that love was always real. The true tragedy is not that McGrath went unloved, because he never did. The tragedy is that football loved him for the wrong reasons for far too long. It saw a brave man battling through pain. It saw a pair of damaged knees holding together a legend. It saw a flawed genius who somehow got through match day after match day. But Pat Nevin saw something else completely. He saw a football brain that understood space, timing, and structure before the modern game even had a name for it. And years later, football finally caught up. Modern tactics, modern language, and modern respect all arrived to prove Pat Nevin right. Paul McGrath was not just surviving out there on that pitch week after week, he was years ahead of it. Football simply just took a very long time to finally notice. Pat Nevin was not chasing headlines when he spoke about McGrath in 2019. He was simply saying out loud what he had known for years, since the very first time their paths crossed on a football pitch. He had watched McGrath up close, tested him, studied him, and never forgotten what he saw. Some players are remembered for one moment, one goal, one tackle, one headline. Paul McGrath deserves to be remembered for something bigger than that. He deserves to be remembered as a man who quietly rewrote what a defender could be, calmly and cleverly, long before the rest of the football world ever found the right words to explain it. That is why Pat Nevin was right about Paul McGrath from the very start. And that is exactly why, all these years later, nobody should stay quiet about it anymore.